What are the actually somewhat ingenious scams criminals come up with? Let's start off with number 6, the Carefree Lady. This mystery female scammer in Australia used fake IDs to scam a car dealership into letting her drive away in a brand new Volkswagen. The woman entered a Melbourne car dealership and used another real woman's identity to arrange financing for the $42,000 car. The con artist was well dressed and confidently strolled around the dealership before sitting down to talk to the salesperson to complete the deal, much like a woman in the Carefree gum commercials of the 80s. She handed over a stolen, modified driver's license as part of the transaction. Police described the thief as 35 to 45 years old with long brown hair and dyed blonde streaks. Surveillance footage caught the fraudulent sale on film, but police couldn't identify her. It was the first time the dealership dealt with theft like this, and they were shocked after watching the scammer drive away in the new vehicle. The person whose driver's license it was found out someone used her stolen details for criminal purposes when a government agency contacted her. The fraudster didn't just use the victim's identity to steal the car. She also used it to make other fraudulent transactions, such as making disaster relief claims and obtaining money from several financial institutions. See, if she'd been more like those people in the Mentos commercials, the dealership would have just laughed it off, appreciating her fresh breath. Number 5, the performance scam. A museum in Denmark gave Danish artist Jens Haaning $84,000 to use in a work of art. But in this case, his $84,000 was just a blank canvas. Staff at the Kunsten Museum of Art in Denmark paid Haaning with the expectation he would create a new version of a previous series he did. In 2007, Haaning framed cash to demonstrate the average annual income in Austria, and in 2010, he did the same to demonstrate an average Danish annual income. The Austrian annual income was $29,000 and the Danish $37,800. The museum loved the work and gave him actual banknotes to use to recreate the pieces. His contract stated he would receive an additional $6,500 to update the work if necessary. So, Haaning updated the work and produced 2 blank canvases titled "Take the Money and Run." According to Hanning's contract with the museum, they gave him the money to display in the artwork, not to keep. He was to pay it back in full when the exhibition closed. The exhibition was called "Work It Out," featuring art from contemporary artists. The goal of the exhibition was to focus on the nature of work and showing society's potential to make working life more sustainable for individuals and society. Other artwork included an interactive meeting room, a sculpture of a FedEx parcel containing reproductions of the lower arms of delivery men, and a photo and video installation examining the working conditions of nurses. They hoped the exhibit would help people stop focusing on work itself and take time to define what it actually is, since they seem to think many people struggle to define it, which is weird because while some may struggle with an actual definition, we're pretty sure everyone knows what work is when they're doing it. When the museum reached out and asked Hanning's involvement, the artist seemed enthusiastic and said it would be an easy project. Despite the legal agreement to return the money, Haaning publicly said he didn't plan on repaying the cash, stating the purpose of the work was that he took the money. He explained his decision came from the pay system Kunsten offered to include his work in the exhibit. His contract had a $1,550 display fee and $6,990 for reimbursement expenses. According to the artist, he would have spent $3,999 of his own money on the piece. Haaning also stated that he created a work of art, as the museum requested. He claimed it commented on the exhibition itself and hoped it would make as big of an impression as his previous pieces. He claimed his canvases were performance art and reflected on working life. Haaning wanted to draw attention to the working conditions of artists and that, as a society, people should question the structures they're a part of. But that explanation is pretty flimsy, considering the same points could be made after the money was returned. Hanning's pieces generated worldwide publicity for Kunsten's event, but the museum argued that he couldn't change the terms of his contract. They gave him until January 2022 to return the money. He refused. His fame also increased over the situation, with his work and actions highlighted in several magazines and tabloid stories that year. Kunsten was adamant they didn't want to involve the police or further escalate the situation. However, as of January 2022, the museum has filed a lawsuit in order to recover the funds. Number 4, the fake sun. Nurse Tony Parker lost thousands of dollars to a cruel WhatsApp scammer that posed as her son. This mom thought that she had wired $3,200 to her son, who was serving in the Royal Air Force and was difficult to contact. Parker's son claimed to have dropped his phone down a toilet and had to get a new number. They exchanged a few messages before her fake son asked to borrow some money since he lost access to internet banking because of the broken phone. As a mother, Parker would do anything to help out her son, so she sent him the money. But she told him she would need it back when he regained access to his account since she was buying a new boiler. Later that morning, Parker spoke to her younger son about the messages. Her other son believed she spoke to a scammer. When Parker checked her WhatsApp, the messages with her fake son were gone. So she immediately called her bank, and they confirmed that the bank account she paid into emptied the money within minutes, meaning they couldn't reverse or trace the payment. According to Parker, the bank, Halifax, said that they don't check all digital transactions as they would suffer financially if they stopped them. God forbid. Halifax, who apparently never makes any mistakes ever, refused to refund the money. They told her she should have been more careful and that it was clear she'd paid into a scam. Obviously, she should have known that it was impossible for her son to have dropped his phone, may have needed a new number, and had temporarily lost access to his bank account. Obviously, Halifax would have been like, "Yeah, right, liar." Parker was pretty upset about the whole thing, feeling that the bank mishandled her money and mistreated her when she reached out for help. She spoke out about the incident, hoping she could stop the same thing from happening to others. Parker thinks she was the victim of an international scam the banks knew about, and, in her opinion, they needed to put stricter measures in place to protect their customers, which seems to be an ongoing theme with banks lately. Halifax released its own statement, expressing sympathy for Parker's situation and explaining its response. They claimed she authorized the payments despite receiving a warning that the account details didn't match. The bank also reminded people to be cautious with cold calls and messages, especially if they involve money and if confirmation checks say the details don't match, despite the reasons the scammer gave her that would invalidate that advice. Since this scam has happened to many people worldwide, it's clear that parents will do whatever it takes to look after their children, even under suspicious circumstances. Number 3. The Citibank Scam. New Zealand-based Boria Aries lost his family's life savings after falling for an elaborate scam. After Aries and his wife had cleared their mortgage, they had $330,000 left behind, so they looked for opportunities to invest. Aries found a site to help compare term deposit interest rates and entered his details. That same day, 2 men reached out, Simon David and James Higgins. David claimed to be a Citibank investment broker based in Auckland, spoke with a soft English accent, and since his number had an Auckland area code, it seemed legit. So Aries went with David, who had all the right knowledge and used all the right terminology. David pitched low-risk investment options that Citibank backed, so Aries decided to invest. Aries chose a bond with Yorkshire Building Society with an interest rate of 13.5%. A building society is similar to a credit union in the US. Aries checked David's LinkedIn profile, which said he was a vice president of corporate banking at Citibank. Although Aries intended on checking with Citibank that the offer was legitimate, he trusted David enough to go ahead without further information. Aries checked with his wife, who said she would leave the decision up to him. He originally intended on investing $250,000 with David, but David convinced him to increase the amount to $330,000. So, Aries sent 2 transfers of $165,000 as his bank wouldn't let him move the whole $330,000 at once. 9 days later, he was discussing the investment with his family and hearing it aloud, realized it sounded suspicious. So he went online and discovered that many people were falling victim to a Citibank scam. After calling his bank, BNZ, Aries found out he had been one of those victims. BNZ said that Aries should have received an alert for transferring money to a Citibank account, and that the banker Aries worked with should have discussed it with him for processing the transaction. Citibank released a statement to clarify that scammers were impersonating it and that it didn't offer financial products or services to retail clients and wouldn't send unsolicited investment opportunities. Number 2. The fake purses. Prepitcha Smatsorabud ran a designer handbag scam where she defrauded department stores out of $400,000. Smatsorabud ran her scam by buying designer handbags online and returning Chinese knockoffs to the stores. She kept the money she made from the refunds, having returned the fake bags with the receipts of authentic purchases. Smatsorabud then sold the authentic versions of the Fendi, Burberry, and Gucci handbags online for over $2,000 each. She operated across the U.S., returning the counterfeit counterfeit bags to more than 60 stores across 12 states. Smatsorabud was born in Thailand and was living in the US on a student visa. However, her Instagram portrayed a lavish lifestyle that didn't match up with the way a student would typically live. Between 2014 and 2015, Smatsorabud bought handbags weekly, and her favorite store apparently was TJ Maxx. At one point, she was their biggest online customer in the world. But this begs the question from us: since when did TJ Maxx start selling designer handbags from Gucci or Celine? When news of her scam broke, TJ Maxx was able to identify 226 of its purses and contacted the police. Federal authorities arrested Smatsorabud when an undercover Homeland Security officer posed as a buyer. Officers found 572 handbags in her home. She was sentenced to 30 months in prison, having made over $1 million in her clever scheme. You might say the feds were in hot pursuit. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay right here for our past release to find out how this mother-daughter duo were able to scam their credit card company over and over. Number 1. The fake fire inspector. Michael Carrion posed as a fire inspector, offering businesses bribes to make violations go away. Carrion visited businesses across the East Coast, including New York City, where he allegedly scammed dozens of people. He entered the establishments and identified potential violations. As a favor to the business owners, he offered to take care of them with the help of a fee ranging from $1,000 and under. Carrion appeared legitimate, accepting cash and even handing out receipts. One of the places he visited was Pearl's Bagels in Washington, D.C. In 2023, he entered on a busy Saturday morning and approached the store manager, Sophie Temple. Carrion asked to check the Ansul system, one of the shop's fire prevention systems. He said he was from Fireline, a third-party company that tags the equipment. Since the Ansul system had a tag with the name Fireline clearly written on it, Temple had no reason to doubt him. They paid him to deal with violations he identified in their system, but later learned he wasn't a Fireline employee. They contacted the police, who shared the surveillance video footage of Carrion entering the store in a plain shirt and black baseball cap. It wasn't the first time Carrion was on law enforcement's radar after New York City authorities busted him for scamming a Brooklyn bakery out of $300 in 2020. Since the incident, investigators connected him to 24 similar schemes between 2019 and 2023. At least 2 of these incidents occurred in Grand Central Food Court. Cops busted in his Bronx home in May 2023 and arrested him. Carrion had 12 open warrants in 7 states for similar operations. The scam itself is pretty clever, but maybe if Carrion would have at least changed up his scam a few times, he wouldn't have been caught so many times. These kids completely scammed this lady in Central Park by convincing her they were lost. And this mother-daughter duo lived a jet-set lifestyle by lying to their credit card companies. Number 4. Geisted. Karen Geist and her daughter Alice Geist defrauded multiple credit card companies of around $850,000 through chargeback fraud for 13 years. Karen Geist, the mastermind behind the con, is a former paraprofessional at Elwood Middle School. According to New York Board of Education records, she lost her job in November 2016. Her daughter Alyssa also worked in education and only left the City Department of Education in 2015. After leaving her job as a teacher, she founded Tutorology, a home and online tutoring service for kids. Before Alyssa ventured into teaching and then conning credit companies, she schooled at St. Joseph's University and majored in secondary math education. At the school, she was a member of the sorority Zeta Sigma Phi, and in her sorority bio, she said her favorite hobby was shopping and that she had a shopping addiction problem. Too bad she didn't know that addiction was going to get her into a lot of trouble. So how did Karen and Alyssa con credit card companies out of almost $1 million? They ran a multi-year scheme where they falsely reported legitimate transactions as fraudulent. The scam started when Karen discovered that she could dispute the payments for items she bought and then get refunded all the money she spent on the item. After that discovery, she recruited her daughter and they both continued the con until they were caught. One time, Karen was able to get as much as $205,000 on her American Express cards and $155,000 on her Chase cards charged back to her as a result of her false report. Karen got her daughter Alyssa into buying her a credit card and asking her to use it for a $1,400 $100 purchase in July 2017. After using the card for the transaction, she followed her mom's specific instructions and disputed the charge to get a refund. In the end, they kind of taught themselves the con, as police discovered texts where Alyssa was giving her mother specific instructions on how to dispute charges in a way that resulted in a chargeback. The mother and daughter duo lived large with the con. They bought expensive items, including travel to exotic locations like Paris, Milan, Costa Rica, and Hawaii. Outside of trips, they went on shopping sprees at places like Bergdorf Goodman and Bloomingdale's. But they didn't just use the con on luxury expenses. They also used it for basic stuff. Karen and Alyssa disputed mundane life expenses like purchases at the dollar store and even a veterinary bill for her dogs. After purchasing or paying for each item, they would call their credit companies and argue that the charges were unauthorized. Since credit card companies understand how commonplace credit card fraud is, they don't usually dispute these claims. However, the duo was never going to get away with it forever. In 2016, Barclays Bank obtained surveillance video of mother and daughter purchasing items at a Chanel store after they reported the purchase items as a fraudulent charge. This began an investigation culminating in their homes being raided by law enforcement agencies. During the raid, the authorities discovered over 100 credit cards. They also discovered used receipts of the supposed fraudulent purchases that they had gotten chargebacks for. While it may look like Karen and Alyssa are callous criminals, this fraud is a trap many Americans fall into. Almost half of all adult Americans say they have been a victim of credit card fraud. This means that it's a very common kind of fraud, and it's in the interest of credit card companies to have policies that protect their customers. Sometimes people take advantage of these policies to perpetuate what's known as friendly fraud. It's where people dispute their legitimate purchases and get charged back their original funds. Interestingly, some people do this unintentionally. For example, if a merchant delivers a product or service you didn't pay for, it may be sensible to ask for a refund. However, if a person gets away with asking for a refund once, this can turn into a habit. And the numbers support that assertion too, as a study by Juniper Research revealed that customers who have had a successful chargeback are 9 times more likely to repeat it. The fact that chargeback frauds are usually low priority means that most people can get away with doing it once or twice. But Karen and Alyssa did it multiple times and used it to fund an extravagant lifestyle. They could have gotten away with it, but were ultimately blinded by greed. Number 3. Fake betting. John Frank Thomas and Thomas Joseph Becker ran an illegal Ponzi scheme masquerading as a sports betting fund and defrauded over 600 people of around $29 million. But this wasn't their first rodeo with the law. Way back in 1990, both men were convicted of running a Ponzi scheme that centered around copy machines. They had received money from companies to buy copy machines and lease them out at a profit. However, the men never bought those machines and spent the money instead. They were arrested and then given 10 and 7-year sentences for their efforts. However, it looks like they served their time but refused to learn their lesson because they have now been indicted for running yet another Ponzi scam. Frank and Becker made up the perfect lie to scam their would-be investors. They told their investors that they had a proprietary handicapping system that gave them simply unbelievable returns with sports betting. They also boasted that they had special insights and ahead-of-the-curve strategies that allowed them to make more money than seasoned investors like Warren Buffett. On one of the many websites they run, they claimed that they had generated greater than 600% compounded gross profit in the last 2 years. They basically said they grew money a quadrillion times faster than Warren Buffett and were making so much money so quickly that they couldn't move it through the banks quickly enough. With this lie, both men were able to raise tens of thousands of dollars from hundreds of investors looking to make it big. They were able to avoid paying investors back by claiming that they couldn't move the money through the banks quickly enough. Investors believed they were investing in a mutual gambling fund and that Thomas and Becker would help them multiply their initial investments. One reason why both men were able to grow their investor base so fast was that they advertised betting heavily on favored teams using round-robin wagers, which are bets consisting of multiple parlays. A parlay is a single wager on 2 or more teams that only pays out if all the single bets win. This makes them quite risky and also very lucrative if they come true. Most casinos prefer parlay bets because they are riskier and it's much easier to make profit off of them, unlike single bets. In total, both men were able to scam over 600 investors of around $29 million. Since the scam was essentially a Ponzi scheme, the con artists were skilled at forging documents to prove to their victims that their initial investment was growing. One of the investors in the gambling fund, a retired engineer from Texas, saw his initial investment of $50,000 rise to around $700,000. Another investor, a New York-based doctor, saw his investment go from $125,000 to around $900,000. One of their earlier victims, a man named Mark Desabray, tried to sue the con artist's several mutual funds and get back his capital. The man invested about $50,000 into one of their funds, and within 2 years, documents from the duo said that his investment had grown to around $2 million. However, Desabray alleged that he hadn't gotten a cent out of his supposed funds. In their defense, Thomas and Becker said that the employee placing the bets at Las Vegas casinos drowned during a short trip to Nicaragua. They said that he got drowned with winning tickets worth millions of dollars. That's probably the most convenient mishap in the history of mishaps to ever occur. Interestingly, Thomas and Becker got away with this lie because they settled out of court with Desabray. In any case, the gambling funds operated by Thomas and Becker required new investments to keep the scam going. To get new investors, they hired investment advisors on Craigslist who helped them source for new victims. Interestingly, they paid out bonuses to these investment advisors who brought them new clients. Since the brothers were running their scam via a Ponzi betting fund, they were able to get away with it for longer. The reason is simple. Sports betting isn't a regulated investment tool, so they were able to fly under the radar for longer. But they were certainly not able to fly under the radar forever. They were eventually found out by the authorities, and a federal grand jury returned a 14-count indictment on both men. They were charged with 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and 13 counts of wire fraud. The statutory penalty per count for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and wire fraud is 20 years in prison, which means that they could bag more than 20 years if they are convicted of the crime. Number 2. Florida ticketing. Thomas Colho made about $1.8 million from running a fraudulent scheme to buy tickets at face value and sell them for a profit. Unsurprisingly, this was far from being Thomas's first rodeo. In 2009, he was arrested by St. Petersburg police and was accused of duping a St. Pete woman of around $115,000 worth of Super Bowl tickets. Interestingly, at the time, Thomas didn't deny his involvement in the crime. He admits he got ticket, and he admits that he gave the woman a fake check in return, but still maintains that it was all an awful misunderstanding. Aside from defrauding that woman, Thomas also had a civil suit pertaining to fraud in Massachusetts and also had old arrest warrants out of California for larceny and grand theft. Perhaps the reason why Thomas was able to carry out his fraud so many times was because his schemes were usually simple. His most recent scheme was to lie that he had connections that allowed him to buy highly coveted live event tickets and that he could easily purchase those tickets at face value and resell them for profit. He told his victims that he was a lawyer and graduate of Wharton School of Business, as that gave him even more credibility. He was able to convince several victims to send him large sums for his business through this guise. However, instead of using the funds to purchase tickets, he spent them on personal expenses, entertainment, and cash withdrawals. But he didn't end there. He continued to string his clients along by providing them with fraudulent documents that proved that he was legit. These documents include a fake wire transfer receipt showing that he had indeed purchased the needed tickets. However, Thomas wasn't just successful with his scheme because he kept it simple. He was also successful because he had excellent human relations. During his trial, one of his victims said that they believed that Thomas had a close friendship with them and, as such, couldn't defraud them. Another said that he had been befriended by Thomas and only began to suspect that he was a victim after losing $1 million. He said that Thomas is an extreme danger to humanity and was quite adept at getting close to his victims and finding their weakness. Once he did that, he went directly for all that he could get. In the end, Thomas was caught by law enforcement and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. But our con artist didn't go quietly into the night. Before his sentencing, he continued to attempt to commit fraud. In fact, he solicited for around $40,000 from a victim of his from jail. He told his victim that he wanted to use the money to hire a private attorney. He was also overheard telling people that he planned to pretend to have a drug problem so as to get a lower sentence. When the judge heard about all of this, he said Thomas's actions were those of someone who believed that they could beat the system. In his defense, Thomas agreed that he'd done a horrible thing and there should be consequences for his actions. Number 1. Lost phone. Laura Grasso was scammed out of $1,000 by two innocent-looking kids who said they wanted to use her phone to call their parents. Laura was enjoying her day in Central Park when two kids who looked around 10 years old approached her. The children said they were lost and needed to call their parents. Laura felt disarmed by their charm and surrendered her phone to them. After about a minute, they handed her her phone and went away. But Laura didn't know that in the interim, the children had transferred $1,000 from her Venmo account to another account. In fact, she got the email notification just a few minutes later. When she did, the children were nowhere to be found. When she checked the email notification, she discovered that they had sent the $1,000 to a Black Lives Matter account. This account was named @BLM201 and described itself as a fundraising business. Since Laura got scammed, there have been 14 private transactions on the account, and the account had a Jersey City address on it. Laura could simply not believe that kids as young as that had scammed her. But once she got over her shock, she began to wonder what else the kids had done to her phone. That was when she decided to report the case to the police. The next day, when she got to the precinct and told her story, the police refused to file a report. They told her that she was to blame because she had handed her phone over to the strangers and she was ultimately responsible for that action. After a back and forth, they eventually agreed to file a petty larceny report. If the kids had stolen a cent more, they would have had to file a grand larceny report as per state law. Fortunately for Laura, she was eventually able to get her money back. She reported the theft to Venmo, and they were able to cancel the transfer before it got to its final destination. They refunded her a few days later. However, Laura wasn't the only victim of these kinds of scams. There was a similar scam where a Florida woman gave a preteen boy her phone to call his parents, and he instead sent $4,000 from her Venmo to an account labeled BLM. These sort of scams are super easy to run because they play on the empathy that adults often have for kids. People usually want to help children, and this kind of scam takes advantage of that. People like Laura are so lucky that they got their money back. Others are usually not so lucky. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section what you think is a bigger scam. Designer brands selling branded t-shirts for hundreds of dollars, or the added option to choose your percentage tip at a checkout counter at a coffee shop or a fast food restaurant.